Totemist. Good evening, dear mortals. I am the Totemist. Long ago, I lived countless human lives in my dreams and faced unfathomable horrors. Tonight, I shall share a few of those with you. May you live in peaceful times. The thing that mimics. The stories my grandmother told me about the forests of Honshu weren't just stories. Growing up in our small mountain village, I'd heard them so often they felt like memories of my own, warnings passed down through generations about things that lurked in the shadows between ancient trees. I never truly believed them, though, not until last summer. Our village sits on the eastern slope of a mountain surrounded by one of the oldest forests in Japan. It's the kind of place tourists visit for a day before moving on to more exciting destinations. For us who live here, the forest is both a provider and a threat, giving us mushrooms, herbs, and wood, but demanding respect in return. My grandmother knew the forest better than anyone. She gathered herbs for her remedies and knew exactly where to find the sweetest wild berries. At 83, she moved through the undergrowth with the confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime learning its secrets. That summer, I was 17 and restless. My friends had all left for university in Tokyo or Osaka, while I stayed behind, helping my family run our small ryokan. The days stretched long and empty, filled with chores and homework for my final year of high school. When Grandma asked if I wanted to join her foraging expedition, I agreed mostly to escape boredom. We set out early on a Tuesday morning. The air was thick with humidity, promising rain later. The forest welcomed us with the familiar symphony of cicadas and birds, the scent of moss and damp earth rising with each step. "Remember, Kenji," Grandma said, as we followed the narrow trail, "the forest has eyes." I nodded absently, having heard this particular warning countless times. In our local folklore, the forest was alive. Spirits and creatures dwelled among the trees, some kind, others not so much. We'd been gathering mushrooms for about an hour when I noticed the silence. The constant background noise of the forest had stopped, replaced by a stillness so complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums. Grandma froze, her hand halfway to a cluster of shiitake growing on a fallen log. Her eyes scanned the underbrush, narrowed with sudden alertness. In the shadowy space between two ancient trees, something watched us. At first glance, it looked like a badger, but its eyes seemed too knowing, too human, as it studied us with an eerie intelligence. "Don't move," Grandma whispered, her hand finding my arm. Her fingers dug into my skin, trembling slightly. The creature didn't move like a normal badger. It stood unnaturally still, its unblinking eyes locked on us, studying us with disconcerting focus. "What is it?" I whispered, unable to look away. "Mujina," Grandma breathed, the word barely audible. The name stirred something in my memory. One of her old stories. Something about a creature that lived in the deepest parts of the forest. Something that could wear human faces. "Back away slowly," she instructed. "No sudden movements." We retreated step by step until we reached a small clearing where sunlight broke through the canopy. Only then did Grandma release her painful grip on my arm. "I thought they weren't real," I said, rubbing the spot where her fingers had left marks. "Just old stories." "Stories exist because they're true," she replied, glancing back toward where we'd seen the creature. "The Mujina is very real and very dangerous, not for its claws or its teeth, but for its deception." "What does it do?" I asked. It mimics, it learns, it replaces. Her voice had dropped to a whisper again, though we were far from where we'd seen the creature. It's rare to see one in its true form. They usually hide better. Should we head back? I suggested, suddenly eager to return to the safety of our village. Grandma shook her head. We need herbs for the upcoming festival, but we'll stay in the sunlight. Mujina prefers shadow. We continued gathering, though now we stayed in open areas, avoiding the deeper parts of the forest. The normal sounds of the surroundings had returned, but the encounter had left me jumpy, startling at every twig snap or bird call. By midday, our baskets were half full with mushrooms, wild vegetables, and medicinal herbs. We reached a small stream where we stopped to rest and eat the onigiri we'd brought along. We need mugwort, Grandma said as we finished our meal. There's a good patch just up that slope. She pointed to an area where the trees grew more densely, casting deep shadows despite the midday sun. I felt a flicker of unease. Can't we find it somewhere else? The best quality grows there, she insisted. We'll go together and be quick. We followed a narrow deer path that wound up the slope. The temperature seemed to drop as we entered the denser part of the forest, sunlight struggling to penetrate the thick canopy overhead. I stayed close to Grandma as she identified and carefully cut sprigs of mugwort with her small knife. The plants grew abundantly here, their silvery green leaves distinctive against the darker foliage. Just a few more, she murmured, moving slightly deeper into the shadows. I was scanning the ground for more plants when I heard her voice from just behind me. Kenji, hold the basket open. I turned, expecting to see my grandma there, but she was about 15 feet away, bent over a particularly large mugwort plant, her back to me. But if she was there, then who had... Kenji, hold the basket open, came the voice again, this time from deeper in the forest. It was perfect. Exactly Grandma's voice, down to the slight rasp from decades of smoking the occasional cigarette she thought no one knew about. Grandma was beside me instantly, her face pale beneath her weathered tan. We're leaving, now. What? Don't speak, she hissed, pulling me back toward the path. It's learning your voice. We hurried down the slope, no longer careful about disturbing plants or making noise. Twice more, we heard Grandma's voice calling from the trees, each time closer despite our rapid retreat. When we finally reached the edge of the forest where it bordered our village's farmland, Grandma stopped to catch her breath. Her hand trembled as she reached into her pocket for a small cloth pouch. Take this, she said, pressing it into my palm. Keep it with you until we get home. The pouch smelled strongly of herbs, some familiar, others I couldn't identify. The pungent scent made my nose itch. Protection, she explained, seeing my questioning look. Mujina dislikes certain smells. We made our way back to our house, which sat at the edge of the village closest to the forest. The family ryokan occupied the front portion, while our private living quarters were in the back. Grandma immediately went to her storage cabinet, pulling out jars of dried herbs and roots. What are you doing? I asked, watching as she began mixing ingredients in a ceramic bowl. Making stronger protection, she replied, grinding the mixture with practiced movements. That Mujina has our voices now. It might follow us here. But why would it? I asked. What does it want? Grandma paused, mortar and pestle in hand. To become, she said simply. It's what they do. They study, they mimic, then they replace. Replace, like taking someone's place, she confirmed. The old stories say they can wear a person's shape so perfectly that even family might not notice the difference. How is that possible? I asked. There are things in this world that exist in the spaces between what we understand and what we don't, Kenji. The Mujina is one of them. She finished her mixture and began placing small piles of it at each entrance to our home. Doors, windows, even the chimney. The sharp medicinal smell filled the house, making my eyes water slightly. I need more wormwood from the garden, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone but me, understand? And I'll say summer rain when I return, so you know it's really me. I nodded, watching anxiously as she slipped out the back door into our small garden. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the yard. I locked the door behind her as instructed. Through the window, I could see her moving among her herb plants, selecting leaves and placing them in her basket. The fading light made it difficult to see clearly. She disappeared behind the garden shed for a moment, and I tensed, suddenly afraid of losing sight of her. A movement near the forest edge caught my attention. Relief washed through me as I spotted my grandmother emerging from the tree line. But wait, that couldn't be right. She was just in the garden, behind the shed. Before I could process this, there was a knock at the back door. "Kenji, open up," came Grandma's voice. "My hands are full." I hesitated, remembering her warning. "What's the password?" I called through the door. A pause. Then, "Don't be foolish, Kenji. It's getting dark. Let me in." The voice was perfect, exactly like my grandmother's, but she hadn't said summer rain. Through the kitchen window, I could see the figure that was standing behind the door. In the dimming light, everything about it matched my grandmother. Her slight stoop, her familiar blue work clothes, even the way she walked with her right foot turning slightly inward from an old injury. The knocking came again, more insistent. "Kenji, open this door right now." I backed away, heart pounding against my ribs. If that wasn't Grandma at the door, then who was approaching from the forest? And where was my real grandmother? I moved to the side window for a better view and saw with horror that there were now two identical versions of my grandmother, one at the back door and one coming from the direction of the forest. As I watched, the second one broke into a run, her face etched with fear as she spotted the first. Our eyes met through the glass, and I saw her mouth words urgently. "Don't open it." She reached the side of the house and tapped frantically at the window. "Let me in through here," she gasped, her clothes dirty and torn like she'd been running through underbrush. "That's not me at the door." With shaking hands, I unlocked the window and helped her climb through. As soon as she was inside, she slammed the window shut and sprinkled some of her herb mixture along the sill. "It trapped me in the forest," she panted, her words coming in short bursts. "Used your voice. Made me think you had gone outside and gotten hurt." The pounding at the back door stopped abruptly, as if the thing outside had heard her. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. Then came a soft sound from outside, almost playful laugh that started as my grandmother's chuckle, but twisted into something hollow. "Clever old woman," said the voice, no longer matching Grandma's. It had a strange echo now, as if multiple voices were speaking in unison. Let me see you. Let me see the real you. Grandma pushed me behind her, facing the door with fierce determination. She clutched a pouch of her herb mixture in one gnarled hand. You are not welcome here, she called out, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. Go back to the forest where you belong. Another laugh, this one even less human than before. Then, impossibly, the door handle began to turn, though I was certain I'd locked it. No, Grandma whispered, rushing forward to press her herb pouch against the door. Too late. The door swung open, revealing what looked exactly like my grandmother standing on the threshold. For a disorienting moment, I thought I was seeing double. Two identical elderly women, one beside me and one at the doorway. But then the one at the door smiled, and everything changed. Its face seemed to ripple, the features shifting subtly to reveal the predator beneath the human disguise. The smile stretched wider than any human mouth should, revealing teeth that were too numerous, too sharp. Its eyes, which had seemed like perfect copies of my grandmother's, now looked glassy, reflecting light like polished stone rather than living tissue. You know me, it said, its voice a bizarre blend of my grandmother's and something else entirely. Few remember the old ones anymore. I know enough to fear you, Grandma replied, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. You are Mujina, the shapeshifter. The thing's smile grew impossibly wider. Names have power, old woman. You shouldn't speak mine so freely. As we watched in horror, the creature began to change. Its borrowed shape, my grandmother's shape, seemed to melt, the proportions shifting unnaturally. Its limbs shrank, and its body hunched forward, dark fur rippling across its skin. Within seconds, what stood before us wasn't human at all, but a bizarre parody of a badger, with unnatural, intelligent eyes that regarded us with what looked disturbingly like amusement. It let out a sound I'll never forget, a chittering laugh that seemed to come from multiple throats at once. Another time, it said, the words forming without its lips moving. When you're alone. With that, it dropped to all fours and darted away with surprising speed, vanishing into the gathering darkness beyond our yard. Grandma slammed the door shut and pressed her herb pouch against it, muttering words I didn't understand, an old prayer or charm perhaps. Then she methodically checked every entrance to our home, reinforcing each with her mixture of herbs. When she finally collapsed into a chair at our kitchen table, I saw how badly her hands were shaking. Are you okay? I asked, taking the seat across from her. What was that thing, really? She took a deep breath, composing herself. The Mujina is old magic, she said quietly. Older than our village, older than the shrines. Most are content to play tricks, frightening travelers, creating confusion. But some do more than trick. They replace. She looked me directly in the eyes. They study a person, learn everything about them, then take their shape so completely that no one notices the difference. They live among humans, wearing stolen faces. I thought about how perfectly it had copied my grandmother. Her voice, her appearance, even her distinctive walk. How can you tell if someone has been replaced? The eyes, she said. They can copy everything else, but the eyes are always wrong. and they can't cross certain thresholds without permission, boundaries protected by salt or specific herbs. That's why it wanted you to invite it in. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds outside, the chorus of frogs and insects that normally brought comfort, now seeming ominous and alien. How long had it been pretending? I finally asked. I saw you. I saw it coming from the forest, but you were in the garden. Her expression darkened. It trapped me in the forest, made me hear your voice calling for help. By the time I realized the trick, I was deep in the trees, and it took me some time to find my way back. What would have happened if I'd opened the door? I asked, though I feared I knew the answer. It would have taken my place, she said simply. Lived my life, slept in my bed, eaten at our table. And what about you? The real you? She didn't answer, but her silence told me everything I needed to know. That night, we took turns keeping watch, the lights burning in every room. Every creak of the old house, every rustle from the garden made me jump, imagining that badger thing watching our home, waiting for another chance. In the morning, Grandma called the village priest. They spoke in low voices, and later that day, he came with 2 assistants to perform a ritual. They walked the perimeter of our property, placing special charms at intervals and chanting prayers. It will help, Grandma assured me afterward, but we must remain vigilant. The following days passed without incident. A week later, when I was helping in the ryokan, a guest asked about hiking trails in the forest. I found myself giving a warning I'd heard from Grandma countless times. Stay on the marked paths, I told them. The forest has eyes. They laughed, thinking it was just local color, a quaint superstition to enhance their authentic rural Japanese experience. But I could only think of glassy eyes watching from between the trees, learning, waiting.